Crafty peeps, this is Kat. I'm very excited to welcome you to my channel and my first video. So Thanksgiving is right around the corner and I thought I'd make a quick and simple Thanksgiving card for y'all. I have most of the supplies on camera here and the main star of the show will be the HoneyBee Give Thanks stamp set, and I also have coordinating dies here, and we'll bring in some alcohol markers to do some simple coloring. Let's get started, shall we? So first things first, I'm going to bring out my MISTI and stamp my greeting. I have a pre-cut panel of just plain white cardstock. This is Neenah Classic Crest 80 pound. I'm positioning the main stamp, and here I'm trying to decide which sentiment I want to use because I can't really pick one. So why not stamp both? We can always decide later. And it's generally never a bad idea to stamp some extra sentiments because you never know when you're going to need them for that emergency card. All right, so I have all of my stamps in the position, and I'm going to close my MISTI door to grab them. And I'm going to get to inking. I'm using Versafine Clair Nocturne ink, and I love this ink. So I'm trying to get an even coverage here, but the beauty of a stamping tool like MISTI is that if you miss a spot, you can always go back and restamp, which you'll see me do. I think I ended up stamping it a couple of times. And I'm not applying too much pressure here because some of the lines are relatively thin and delicate, and I don't want to squish the ink and make those lines fuzzy. I cannot get enough of this ink. It always comes out so crisp. Like, this panel already looks pretty good for one pass, but I'm gonna stamp it again just to get that saturated and crisp look. All right, so our greeting is ready, and to avoid smearing the ink, I'm gonna heat set this with the heat gun off camera. So one thing I want to note here is that typically for alcohol markers, the pigment ink is not recommended because the ink from the markers can smudge the ink from the stamp if you saturate the paper too much. Heat setting the pigment ink should definitely help, but I would not recommend using this ink if you plan on coloring over your inked lines a lot. I hope my explanation makes sense. If you want to color over the lines, I would use a dye-based ink instead for that. But in our particular case, it's not going to matter because the areas we're going to be coloring are so small. All right, so I've heat set this panel off camera, and you can see there's a bit of warping going on from the heat, but that doesn't really matter because it will all flatten out when we die cut it. Now on to the actual coloring itself. I'm using Ohuhu alcohol markers here in colors G1, Y3, R170, and YR190. And I'm not doing anything fancy here at all, just coloring the little areas, the little spots. I'm not doing any fancy shading. These areas are so small, there's really no point here, as it's just not going to be visible. So I'm just going in with each color until everything is colored in and we have ourselves a cute little image. Next, I'm going to line up my dies and cut all of this out. So these dies are pretty easy to line up, and I like that they cut out really close to the image. I like to tape them down to avoid shifting in a die cutting machine. And now we have this beautiful little greeting. All we have to do is pop out the little pieces in between the letters. Like, look how cute this little greeting is, you guys. All right, so I'm going to set all of this to the side for now, and I'm going to work on the background panel for the card. So I have another pre-cut panel of Neenah 80 pound cardstock, and I also have an Altenew Ways to Thank You 3D embossing folder, and here I'm just trying to decide which way I want the letters to go, horizontally or vertically, and in the end I've decided to go with the landscape. So before I emboss this panel, I'm going to get out my spray bottle and mist the cardstock off camera to prevent the cracking. And I usually hold the cardstock at arm's length and mist it on each side. I also like to bring in a paper towel and dab away any extra moisture because we just need a slightly damp cardstock, not wet cardstock. So I will line this up in the folder the way I want it to, and we'll run this through my die cutting machine off camera. And look at this, y'all. This is so cute. So I need to trim this panel down for a couple of reasons. One, I want a small little frame around my background, and two, when you emboss, the edges often come out a little stretched or warped. So cutting this down will help even all of this out. My original panel was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm trimming this down by 1/4 inch so it would come out as 4 by 5 1/4. I tried my best to line this up to keep the letters, but in the end I just ended up lopping off one of the sides, but oh well. So I want to create a focal point on my card by darkening the edges. So I'm bringing out my Distress Oxide ink and Vintage Photo, and I'm going to go around these edges to create some visual interest. I'm loading up my blending brush with the ink, and I'm tapping off some excess on my work surface so that I don't end up with a harsh line when the brush touches the paper. Usually if I'm ink blending, like an entire panel, I would use the foam blending tool because I feel like those pick up and lay down more ink than a brush, but in our particular instance, I just need a bit of color, which is when the blending brush comes in handy. So I'm going all around the edges of the panel, picking up the ink from my work surface or loading up my brush again. Remember, y'all, this doesn't need to be perfect. The greeting will be the main focus, and this will help just draw the eye to the center. Usually when I'm blending, I'm going back and forth, and often I will go back to the beginning just to make sure that everything is exactly the way I want it. All right, so next I'm bringing out my scoreboard, and I have half a sheet, so 8.5 by 5.5 of Cranberry cardstock from Concord and Ninth, and I'm gonna score it in the middle to make my card base. I made little marks on my scoreboard at 4.25 and 5.5, so I don't have to think about measurements too much when I'm crafting. So I've scored it at 4.25, and I'm gonna burnish it with a Teflon bone folder. I'm gonna check for any overhangs or uneven edges because I don't know about you, but this is one of those things that drives me absolutely bonkers. I really like my card bases to be even where all of the edges line up. So as you saw, I had misaligned edges on one of the sides and at the bottom. So I'm gonna bring out my trimmer and just cut those off. And it's quite literally just a hair on either side. And while I have my trimmer out, I will also cut down a white panel for the inside of my card. I'm just trimming off a 1/4 inch on two sides, which will give me an 1/8 of an inch border all around when I glue this down. My card base is about 80 pounds, I believe. It's a slightly thinner cardstock, so to make it more sturdy, I will glue in a white panel on the inside. And this will also provide a place for us to write a personal message. I got my Barely Arts liquid glue here. I really like how strong this glue is. It gives me some wiggle room when I just apply it, but once it dries, like that's it. It's dead set in place. I'm going around the edges of the panel and also putting some of the glue down in the middle. I will flip this panel around and try to line it up the best I can so that I have an even border around all sides. So with the liquid glue, you have a couple of seconds to move things around and get them into the right position as long as you don't press down straight away. So I'm just trying to make sure that my border is all even on all sides. I want my card to stay shut, so I have a piece of Spellbinders tape, and I'm just removing some of the stickiness by sticking it to the back of my hand first. I'm gonna make a loop so that the adhesive is on the outside, and I will stick it inside the card and close it. Next, I'm gonna do what I call a dry run, where I'm just laying out my elements, making sure that everything is correct before I glue them down. I like doing this before I fully commit because it gives me an opportunity to do any final checks or add or remove the elements that aren't working. So remember how we stamped two sub-greetings, and now's the time to make a decision. I went back and forth a couple of times, but couldn't really pick one, so what I ended up doing is bringing both sentiments in and covering one of them with my hand, just to see which one I like better. In the end, in all things have won. I want to give my panel some definition, so I'm going to use some foam tape to give it a lift. This is a scrapbook.com foam tape in 2mm thickness, I believe. And I like it a lot because the backers are super easy to remove. So I'm measuring it out here to fit my panel, and honestly, you don't need to cut it down to size perfectly. As long as you have most of the area covered, you're good. One of my strips was a tad too long, so I trimmed it and stuck the extra piece down at the bottom. I usually like to put the top and the bottom in place first and then split the difference in the middle. All right, so I'm removing the backers. You can see they come off pretty easily, and I'm gonna try my best to line this up on my card base. The best way to make sure everything is straight is to stand up so you have the bird's eye view. But even then, I have to admit, y'all, this is way, way harder. This was a real struggle doing it on camera because you can't see anything with the camera getting in the way. So I ended up moving the card to the side here so that I can at least see what I'm doing. Once you get your alignment just right, it's time to commit. So press it all down so that the foam adhesive grabs the paper. Now let's bring back our grading. You're probably wondering what the heck you're looking at here. These are just some extra die cuts for the grading and the sub-sentiment. I just cut those out from the panels where I messed up my stamping, like where the lines came out blurry or where I smudged the ink on accident. I don't throw out any of my scraps or messy panels because you can use those to stack your die cuts for extra dimension. And guess what? No one's gonna know they're there unless you tell the recipient. I stamped all of my gradings on an 80-pound cardstock, so it feels just a bit too delicate for my taste. So stacking several layers together will make the die cut stronger, and it's also a great way to use up all of your scraps. So I'm gluing all of these sentiments together, making sure they line up just right. And take your time here, the liquid glue gives you enough wiggle room to get your alignment spot on. And I have 3 total layers for both the give thanks and the sub-sentiment, and they now feel much thicker and sturdier. So here I'm doing my final checks before I start gluing everything down. Once I'm happy with that, it's time to finish the card. So I'm putting a good amount of glue on my main grading because I want to make sure that it stays attached to the textured background. Remember, we have all of those letters sticking up on our embossed panel. I had to move the panel to the side again so that I can see, and I'm really just taking my time here, making sure that I get the perfect alignment. And once I'm happy with that, I'm gonna really press it down to make sure that it adheres. And it's always a good idea to put something heavy on top when you're adhering something to the textured background. I don't have any fancy acrylic blocks, but I do have a case with my wax seals. And let me tell you, this thing is hefty. So I'm gonna put this on top of my card while the adhesive dries. And once I give it a second, I'm gonna glue down my sub-sentiment. Finagle it into place until it's just right, and we're almost done here. I think this card came out super cute. I'm quite happy with it. The last step here is to remove the tape that we put on the inside and stamp the back of the card. Here I just have a stamp that says made by 3 crafty kitties. And I don't know, you guys, I have 3 kitties, and for some reason I just like to give them credit for all the hard work that I do. So there you have it, a completed card for someone special in your life. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye!